My name's Sarah Whitman, I'm 31, and the day my family read Grandpa's will, I felt like the only person in the room without a script. At that table, in a lawyer's office, 2 blocks from downtown Santa Fe, my parents handed my younger sister a check for $10 million. They smiled, she smiled, then they turned to me and said, "You're smart. Go build your own." I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stared at the reflection of the overhead light in the polished wood, trying to keep my fingers from curling into fists. The envelope came next, and that's when everything cracked. It's strange how quiet can suddenly feel like thunder. If you've ever been overlooked by your own family, passed over, pushed aside, told to be grateful while someone else was chosen, this story might feel a little too familiar. If it does, I hope you'll leave a comment, click like, or follow along. Because maybe, like me, you're done pretending it didn't hurt. The man who stood up wasn't part of the main legal team. Gray suit, weathered hands, thick glasses that made his eyes look softer than they probably were. He unfolded an envelope that looked older than anything else on the table. "I have one more document," he said quietly. My mother's shoulders went stiff. My father coughed and adjusted his watch. My sister's smile flattened as she leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. I didn't say a word. The envelope had my grandfather's handwriting across the front, bold, careful, almost block-lettered. I recognized it instantly. He used to send me newspaper clippings in the mail about bees and seed preservation. He'd underline sentences and write little notes in the margins like, "You'd like this one, kiddo?" That envelope changed everything, and it led me straight back to a place I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. My grandfather's old farmhouse outside Taos, where the floorboards creaked just right, and the wind coming down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains used to rattle the windows like they were whispering stories. I hadn't been back since before his health turned. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of the rental car. It was early October. Too warm for fall, too dry for memory. The white paint on the front porch was still flaking, the screen door still tilted to one side. A wind chime hung near the awning, tangled and silent. The whole house felt like it had taken a breath and was still waiting to exhale. I paused, then knocked. It took a full minute before the door creaked open. "So, you finally showed up." Her voice hadn't changed. My grandmother Margaret still had that sharp edge that cut straight through you. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, chin tilted up. Not angry, not welcoming either. I opened my mouth, then shut it. She stepped aside without a word. I followed her in. The living room was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it just felt that way because the air inside was heavier, like time had pooled in the corners and gone stale. She disappeared down the hallway and came back holding a notepad, the kind Grandpa used to scribble in at breakfast. "This is the number he kept calling," she said, handing it to me. I blinked. The digits were neat, underlined. But it wasn't my number. "Grandma, that's not mine. I haven't changed it in years." She stared at the paper, then at me. "He told us you did, that you didn't want to be contacted." My stomach dropped. "They?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Your parents, and Rachel." I sat down on the edge of the couch, hands clasped to keep them from shaking. "I came in March. Rachel said you weren't home." Her face hardened. "We were here." The silence between us stretched, heavy and raw. And that was only the beginning. I sat there for a long time, holding the notepad like it might explain everything if I stared hard enough. The numbers weren't even close to mine. Not a wrong digit or two, just completely different. Not a single match. Grandma stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed again, though this time her fingers tapped lightly against her elbow. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the wall behind me, like she'd rather talk to the ghost of the wallpaper than face what this meant. "Demi said you moved," she said flatly. "Changed everything. That you were starting over and didn't want reminders." I looked up. "That's not true." "Demi said you told them not to pass anything along. that you didn't want to be involved. I called Grandma, left messages. I even came by in March. Rachel answered the door and said you were out of town. Her mouth tightened. We haven't left this place in months. I exhaled slowly, pressing my thumb into the worn edge of the notebook. She looked me in the eye, I said, and lied. Grandma didn't respond. She walked into the kitchen, the linoleum squeaking beneath her steps. I followed. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood, familiar and stale at the same time. She opened a drawer near the sink and pulled out an envelope. This came the week after the funeral, she said, placing it on the counter. From you. I stepped closer. The handwriting was blocky and confident, but it wasn't mine. My name was misspelled. I didn't write that. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it in her face, that small, almost imperceptible shift from disbelief to recognition. Her shoulders sagged just slightly. Emmy told us he skipped the service. I didn't even know he was gone until it was over, I said, quieter than I meant to. They told me it was at noon. I got to the church, and it was empty. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It was at 9. I felt it then, like a thud low and thick in my chest, something I'd swallowed months ago and told myself not to feel too deeply, but it was right there now, rising up. I would have been there, I said, gripping the counter. I would have stood next to you. I know, she whispered. Now I do. The kitchen clock ticked over to 5:17. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to rattle the porch chime again. This time it sounded different, less like a memory, more like a warning. Grandma moved to the table and sat down slowly. She looked smaller than I remembered. Still sharp, still steady, but smaller. I thought you didn't care, she said. I thought you disappeared. I was shut out. She nodded again, eyes fixed on a chipped spot in the table's surface. And I let them tell me who you were? I should have known better. We sat like that for a while. No one reached for a tissue. No one tried to explain anything away. We just sat. Two women who'd both been misled in different ways, piecing together what had been taken from us. Then she stood. I'm making a call, she said. To who? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the kitchen wall and picked up the rotary phone, the same one Grandpa always used. The dial turned slowly, deliberately, each click echoing. When the line picked up, her voice dropped into something colder. Lillian, I need you and Rachel here. Tonight. I heard the protest on the other end, tinny and vague. She cut it off. No, you'll be here in an hour. Then she hung up. I raised an eyebrow. What's going on? She didn't look at me when she said, the lawyer's on his way too. Grandma didn't say much after that. She moved around the kitchen in slow, purposeful loops, pulling mugs from the shelf, setting water on the stove, folding a dish towel that was already full. I sat back down at the kitchen table and watched her hands. They looked just like Grandpa's, worn, strong, the kind of hands that could carry firewood or braid pie crust without flinching. Only now, they trembled slightly at the knuckles. What's the lawyer supposed to do? I asked. She didn't look at me. Read the rest of your grandfather's instructions. Rest of what? Grandma finally met my eyes. He left things unsaid. On purpose. Said it had to be done this way, with all of them in the room. Outside, the sun dipped just low enough to catch the tops of the cottonwood trees out back. The branches swayed like they were exhaling. I traced the edge of the table with my fingertip. This was the same spot where Grandpa used to sit with his coffee, reading printouts I'd mailed from my environmental studies classes. He'd squint at charts, ask me questions no one else ever bothered to. One time I told him I wanted to study microbial memory in drought-prone crops, and instead of brushing it off, he said, "Hell of a thing to want to remember water." The kettle started to hiss. Grandma turned off the burner and poured hot water into two mismatched mugs. They won't like this, she said. No, I agreed, but I'm tired of pretending I don't care. She slid a mug toward me. Chamomile, no honey, just the way Grandpa drank it. For the next hour, we didn't talk. I sat with my hands wrapped around the mug, watching the steam twist up and vanish. Every few minutes, Grandma glanced toward the clock, then toward the porch, then back at the clock. At exactly 6, tires crunched over gravel outside. She stood up slowly. "Stay here. I'll call you when it's time." From the kitchen, I heard the screen door open. "My goodness," my mom's voice trilled. "It still smells the same in here. You haven't changed a thing." Dad's voice followed. Calm, low. "I thought all of this was handled already, Margaret." And then Rachel. "Seriously, you dragged us out here for this?" Chairs scraped the floor. Someone sighed loud enough to make a point. Then Grandma's voice, clipped and cold. "Please sit down. Mr. Bennett is on his way." I pictured their faces. Confused, a little annoyed, possibly bored. They didn't know I was in the next room. They didn't know what was coming. I stayed seated, gripping my mug like it was anchoring me. A new voice joined the others. Male, measured, steady. "This won't take long," he said, "but it needs to be done properly." And then I heard her call me. "Sarah, come in now." I stood. My palms left 2 faint wet prints on the ceramic. I wiped them on my jeans and walked to the doorway. 3 heads turned the moment I stepped into view. Mom's smile froze mid-session. Dad's jaw shifted sideways the way it always did when he was caught off guard but didn't want to show it. Rachel's face went pale. Not sick pale. Shock pale. Her mouth parted slightly, like she'd been about to speak but forgot how. I didn't rush. I didn't smile. Grandma motioned to an empty armchair across from them. I walked over, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap. The lawyer opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and looked at each of them before speaking. "This," he said, "is the final directive of Raymond Whitman, recorded and sealed per his request." Mr. Bennett adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and opened the envelope with the kind of care usually reserved for old maps or fragile blueprints. I watched his fingers, not shaky, just methodical. Everything about him felt neutral, like he'd spent years learning how not to react to family drama. "To Margaret Whitman," he began, glancing briefly at Grandma, "I leave the property at 1186 Carson Ridge, along with its contents and associated maintenance funds." No one flinched. Grandma gave a small nod and folded her hands in her lap. He turned the page. "To my granddaughter, Sarah Whitman." The air in the room shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just sharper, like someone had opened a window. I didn't move. "I leave the Whitman Agricultural Annex, located at 204 Birch Valley Lane, including all associated land, laboratory equipment, research archives, patents, and pending grant contracts. Full ownership without condition." My mother let out a breath that sounded more like a question. Dad sat straighter in his chair. Rachel blinked twice, slow, like she needed time to do the math. But I just sat there, hands folded. I didn't trust myself to speak. "And finally," Mr. Bennett continued, "the remainder of Mr. Whitman's estate, bank holdings, investment accounts, retirement funds, shall be divided evenly between his 2 granddaughters, Sarah and Rachel." Rachel shot up like her seat had burned her. "What?" she snapped. No, that's not," he said. Mr. Bennett didn't flinch. "This was signed, witnessed, and notarized 8 months before his passing." She pointed across the room at our parents, voice shaking now. "You told me. Dad, Mom, you both said I'd get everything. You said if I kept visiting him, if I just stayed visible, it would all come to me." My dad kept his eyes on a water ring on the coffee table. My mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. Rachel turned to me, her face twisted. "You weren't even around. You left, and now you get the annex?" I stayed seated. "I didn't leave," I said, voice low. "I was pushed out." Rachel let out a half laugh. "Oh, please." Mr. Bennett raised a hand gently. "There is more." Rachel dropped back into her seat, arms folded like armor. "There's a personal letter," he said, "to be read aloud, at Mr. Whitman's request." Grandma stood without a word, walked to the cabinet by the fireplace, and pulled out a folded sheet of thick paper. She handed it over without looking at anyone. Mr. Bennet unfolded it slowly. I recognized the handwriting instantly, confident, careful, and slightly angled to the right. He began reading. To my dearest Sarah, if this is being read, then I'm no longer sitting across the table from you with a cup of tea in hand. But my belief in you is still here, louder than ever. You were always the one who looked twice at problems, at people, at possibility. The one who asked real questions while the rest nodded politely. I saw that. I always saw that. My throat tightened. I focused on the pattern of the rug to keep my eyes dry. You were born into a family that preferred sparkle over substance. That's not your fault, but you, Sarah, you glowed. Quietly, consistently, in ways they never understood. Rachel shifted again, this time without the fight. Don't let them convince you that being different meant being less. Mr. Bennet paused, cleared his throat again, but not because he needed to. I leave you the annex not just for what you can do with it, but for what you've already done. Kept going, even when no one clapped. He folded the letter slowly, placing it back into its envelope. The room had gone still, not tense, just waiting. I didn't mean to speak, I really didn't. But something about the way Mr. Bennet folded that letter, gentle, like it deserved silence, made the quiet too loud. I remember that notebook, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The one he mentioned. 3 heads turned toward me, like they'd forgotten I was still in the room. I was 7, I kept going. Tracked how long it took for snowflakes to melt in different cups. Labeled them A through E. Grandpa called it my first field experiment. No one responded. Mom stared at the floor like she was waiting for it to give her a script. Dad rubbed the back of his neck with one hand, the way he always did when someone else had said what he couldn't. Rachel didn't blink. Her hands were balled in her lap. None of you asked about that notebook, I said. Not once. Sarah, Dad finally said, this isn't the time to rehash the past. It's the only time, I said, because every time I tried to be proud of something, you either ignored it or found a way to turn it into a punchline. I turned to Rachel. And you? Every science fair? Every scholarship? Every late-night call from Grandpa? You turned it into a threat. She let out a short breath through her nose. You always made everything about you. I shook my head. No, I made space for myself where none existed. You just didn't like that I didn't ask for permission. She leaned forward, arms tight across her chest. You weren't here. You didn't visit. You disappeared. I didn't disappear, I said. You blocked the door. Rachel's jaw clenched. I looked at Mom then. Her eyes were shiny but dry. You told Grandma I didn't want to see her, I said. You gave Grandpa a fake number. Her lips parted but no sound came. I turned back to Rachel. That's not distance, that's erasure. Grandma stood before anyone else could speak. Enough, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was final. Mom opened her mouth. Mother. No, Grandma said. I watched you let her get pushed out. I believed you when you said she didn't care. That's on me. But I won't sit through another minute of pretending. Dad looked like he wanted to object. He didn't. She got her education, he muttered, more to the room than to me. She had her camps, her travel. That wasn't free. I turned to him. You didn't pay for any of that. Grandpa did. He found the scholarships. He booked the flights. He read every article I sent. You didn't even know what country I was in half the time. His mouth tightened, but he said nothing. You made me feel like a cost. He made me feel like I mattered. Rachel stood up suddenly. You think you're so pure, she said. You think you earned this because you're smarter. I met her eyes. No, I earned it. Because I never used love as currency. She flinched. And that, Grandma added, is exactly why he left it to her. The silence that followed didn't hurt. It landed clean. I don't know what came over me, but I looked Rachel in the eye and said, You can keep the money. The room snapped quiet, like the air had been vacuumed out of it. Her face froze. What? I stood up. Split it however you want. I don't care about the accounts. I care about the annex. That's the only thing that ever felt real. Mom blinked, unsure whether to protest or let it land. Dad shifted in his chair. Sarah, be reasonable. No, I said, that's done. I'm not chasing their approval anymore. Rachel stared at me, arms crossed so tightly I thought she might cut off her own circulation. You're bluffing, she said. I'm not. I turned to Mr. Bennett. Can I sign something now, or does this have to become another meeting? He nodded, slowly. We can file an amendment, but it'll require written consent from both parties. I'll draft it tonight, I replied. Rachel didn't say a word. Grandma, still standing, looked at me with something softer than pride, not satisfaction, just a quiet kind of recognition. I sat back down, steadier now. My hands had stopped shaking. There was nothing left for them to argue, nothing they could take back. So they started gathering their things. Rachel moved first, her bag snapped shut like a trap. Mom followed, still dazed, like someone walking off a stage before the curtain drops. Dad lingered, just a second longer. You know, he said, turning to me, we did our best. I didn't smile. Maybe, but it wasn't enough. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't try again. They left without another word. No hugs, no goodbyes, just the creak of the porch and the sound of tires backing down the gravel. I didn't move. I just sat there, in that old armchair, staring at the spot where they'd been. Grandma brought me a glass of water. No words, just the gesture. She sat down across from me, her hands rested on her lap, calm now. I let too much go unspoken, she said, but not anymore. I nodded. We sat in the quiet for a while, and for once, it didn't feel like silence was swallowing me. It felt like breathing room. Have you ever sat in a room where the truth finally caught up to people who tried to outrun it? What would you have said if you were in my place? I'd really love to know. Drop a comment, or just share this if it reminds you of a moment you couldn't undo but finally understood. Later that night, I walked into the kitchen to find Grandma boiling water again. The porch light buzzed behind her, casting a halo over the countertop. He started planning that annex years ago, she said, not turning around. Didn't tell anyone but me, said it had to be yours. Not donated, not named after him, just yours. I stood in the doorway, arms folded, and let it settle. He said, you'd need a place where you didn't have to prove anything. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. Not because I was trying to be strong, just because the weight was shifting. I leaned against the doorframe and smiled. He was right. Grandma looked over her shoulder. He usually was. I left just after sunrise, the kind of morning where the light feels quieter than the air. Grandma handed me a paper bag with a banana and 2 pieces of toast, still warm. Don't speed, she said. I drive like you, I smirked. She didn't laugh, just raised an eyebrow and shut the door behind me. The annex was about 40 minutes north of town, tucked behind a long stretch of cotton fields and a half-commenced barn that still had a "For Lease" sign with faded lettering. I'd never seen it in person. Grandpa always talked about the project, but no one in the family asked questions, or if they did, he never answered. The road turned to dirt about 2 miles before the address. It kicked up soft dust behind the tires, and for some reason, that small cloud in the rear view made me nervous, like I was arriving somewhere I wasn't supposed to see yet. Then I saw it. A wide structure with a metal roof, red wood siding, and a greenhouse stretching out like an arm from the east wall. It looked like a barn on the outside, but someone had clearly been busy inside. I parked under a crooked shade tree and stepped out. My boots sank slightly into the dry soil. The front door wasn't locked. It creaked just enough to remind me it had history. Inside was light. Floor-to-ceiling windows on one side, long tables in the center, shelves lining the walls. Lab equipment, all labeled and sealed, A centrifuge, still in its plastic wrapping. Boxes with my name handwritten on the side, not printed, handwritten. And, in the middle of the main table, something that made my chest tighten all over again. My childhood notebook. It was beat up, the corners were bent, the cover half torn. I'd thought it was lost years ago when I moved apartments. I walked over and placed my hand on it without even thinking. He'd kept it. The room didn't feel like a monument. It felt like an invitation. I sat on the edge of a stool and just breathed. The kind of breath where nothing needs to be solved or defended. The kind Grandpa used to take after fixing something small and mechanical, like a toaster or an old fan. A yellow post-it note was stuck to the far wall. I stood up and walked over. The handwriting was slanted and familiar. Letter build, no one's permission required. I didn't cry, not exactly, but my shoulders dropped and I let the silence settle into me. It felt good. I spent the rest of the morning opening drawers, checking outlets, skimming through equipment manuals. Everything was set up to work, but untouched, like he wanted the first fingerprints to be mine. Near noon, I stepped out into the greenhouse. Warm, humid, still empty, but not for long. That night, I drove back into town with soil under my nails and a folder full of sketches for an irrigation pilot program I hadn't even known I still remembered how to design. Grandma was already making tea. Was it what you expected? She asked without turning around. No, I said, placing the folder on the table. It was better. She nodded once. I moved into the annex the following week. Not permanently, at least, not yet. But enough to know which drawer held the lab gloves, and which light switch hummed when you left it on too long. Tara and Micah arrived 2 days later, both dragging duffel bags, coffee thermoses, and notebooks too full to clothe flat. We'd met during my master's program, at UNM, two people who cared more about root systems than social mixers. They were the kind of colleagues who didn't flinch when you said things like, "Do you think beans remember drought?" We cleaned for 2 straight days, vacuumed out spider webs, tested outlets, labeled shelves. The lab had good bones. Grandpa hadn't just built a space, he'd left behind intention. There were extra chairs, quiet corners, even a cabinet of journals sorted by decade. He knew how research grew, slowly, then all at once. Our first project came from a local farming co-op. Test a low-budget micro-irrigation system for small plots. Nothing flashy, no big university headlines, but it was the kind of thing that mattered. We built models out of PVC pipe, measured soil retention by hand, wrote reports with more crossed-out sections than finished ones. Tara cursed like a sailor every time we lost data. Micah color-coded our errors like it was some kind of performance art. But we showed up every morning, even when nothing worked, especially then. Late one night, I stayed back alone. The others had gone home. I sat on the floor by the west window, legs crossed, laptop dark beside me. The only sound was the quiet click of the fridge in the break room, and the occasional creak from the tin roof cooling down. I pulled Grandpa's letter from the notebook where I kept it tucked. It had a small coffee stain on one corner now. I unfolded it and found the line that always stopped me. You built your own truth in a family that never learned to honor yours. I whispered it out loud. Not like a mantra, just a reminder. That week, I started drafting a proposal for something I hadn't thought I was brave enough to attempt. A science initiative for middle schoolers in rural areas. Kids like me, curious, quiet, often overlooked. We named it the Seed Project. Our first batch of students came from 3 small schools in the county. 12 kids, aged 10 to 13. We gave each of them a leather-bound notebook with blank pages and a sticker that said, "Write down what you notice, even if no one asks." Some of them didn't speak much. Some asked too many questions. All of them belonged. By week 2, they were testing water pH, sketching root patterns, and measuring leaf respiration with plastic bags and binder clips. It was messy, chaotic, and absolutely perfect. One afternoon, I caught a girl named Lily bent over her notebook, sketching a plant she'd found behind the greenhouse. her tongue stuck slightly out the side of her mouth, and her fingers were stained green. She looked up and said, "Do you think plants listen when we talk to them?" I nodded. "I hope so." She grinned and went back to drawing. That night, I sat on the front steps of the annex, watching the sun dip behind the hills. My hands smelled like basil, my shoulders ached, my brain was full. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just doing the work. It was late March, the kind of day where the wind keeps changing its mind, warm in the sun, sharp in the shade. I was reorganizing storage bins near the compost shed when Micah jogged across the gravel, waving his phone. Someone's here for you," he said, a little out of breath. "Didn't have an appointment." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Who is it?" He hesitated. "Rachel." I stood still, long enough for the breeze to kick dust around my ankles. "She said she emailed last week," he added. I nodded slowly. "She did. I just didn't open it." She was standing by the main entrance when I got there. No heels, no lip gloss. Her coat looked like it belonged to someone bigger. Worn canvas, sleeves a little too long. She held a folder close to her chest like it might shield her. "Hey," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Huh." She looked around. "This place is more than I imagined." I didn't answer. "I didn't come to argue," she said quickly, "or ask for anything." I stepped aside, pulling the door open. "You want to see it?" She blinked, surprised. "You don't mind?" I shrugged. "I didn't build it to keep people out." We walked in quietly. I gave her the short version: labs, greenhouses, student wall. She didn't interrupt, just kept her arms folded and her steps small. When we reached the community garden, she stopped. Kids were harvesting kale, 2 middle schoolers arguing gently over worm compost. A mother helped her son tie his shoelaces near the irrigation demo. Rachel watched for a while. "They look like they belong," she said. I do?" Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her coat sleeve. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I wouldn't, if I were you." I didn't say anything, just let the silence sit there until it stopped buzzing. "I just wanted to see what he gave you, what you did with it." She handed me the folder. "This might be nothing, but it's something I've been working on." I took it but didn't open it. Not yet. We stood there a bit longer. Then she said, "Can I come back sometime? Not as family, just to help." "Help how?" He smiled, small, a little crooked. "I'm good with kids, weirdly, especially the quiet ones." I nodded. "We always need volunteers." She left after an hour. No long goodbyes, just a quiet wave at the door. Later that night, I opened the folder. Inside was a rough draft. A communication toolkit for shy students. Simple sketches. Scripts for classroom introductions. Notes in the margins like, "Use softer lighting if possible," and avoid phrases like, "Speak up." It wasn't polished, but it was careful, thoughtful. A week later, she came back. Helped set up chairs. Sat with a student struggling to explain her seed experiment. Didn't interrupt. Didn't perform. The kids started calling her Coach Rach. She didn't say sorry, not directly, but she showed up. Twice a month became every Saturday. Eventually, she led a workshop on how to pitch research ideas to adults who don't listen well. It landed. Big time. And one evening, while cleaning paintbrushes after a soil art project, she said, "He was right about you, you know." I looked over. She didn't look away. "You were never the quiet one, you were just the one nobody heard." It's been 5 years since the reading of that will. The annex is no longer just a barn with lab tables, it's now a full research campus, 3 greenhouses, a soil lab, a library built out of reclaimed wood, and a stretch of test fields that change color with every season. We've partnered with local schools, expanded the seed project into 7 counties, and built a mobile science van that visits kids too far out to make it here. Most days, I bike in. The air smells like hay and rosemary, and the gravel crunch under my tires still reminds me of that first morning I came alone. that quiet kind of courage. Grandma lives in a small apartment just off the back garden. She still makes chamomile tea every evening and tells me stories about Grandpa that never made it into any letter. Micah and Tara stayed. We argue about spreadsheets more than we used to, but we're building something real. Something steady. And Rachel? She's still here. Twice a month, sometimes more. The students love her. She's even started mentoring one of our high school interns who wants to go into public speaking. Her voice is different now. Softer, but not weak. Just less defended. We don't talk about the will anymore. We don't need to. The past hasn't vanished. It still echoes sometimes in small ways. A hesitation in my voice, a knot in my stomach when certain emails show up in my inbox. I haven't spoken to my parents since that day they walked out, and I've made peace with that. Some people don't come back. Some people never arrive in the first place. But here's the truth I carry now, the one Grandpa left in every corner of this place. I was never meant to earn their love. I was meant to live outside of their conditions. And I am. Every time I hand a shy 12-year-old their own blank notebook, every time a student tells me they never thought they were smart until they came here, every time I look at the sunset through the annex windows and think, he'd like this, I know exactly where I stand. Not waiting to be chosen. Already home. There's something I've learned in these years of building and listening. Healing doesn't always come from an apology. It often comes from doing the work anyway. So I'm curious, have you ever found peace in a place that didn't include the people who hurt you? What helped you keep going? If this story landed with you, if it reminded you of someone you used to be or still are, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're ready to follow the next chapter of this wild, quiet, fiercely earned life, stick around. There's more coming. Sarah's story isn't just a journey of reclaiming an inheritance. It's a journey of reclaiming herself. In the midst of silence, exclusion, and lies, she chose to build a kinder world, not to prove anything, but to live in alignment with her values. In real life, healing doesn't always come from those who hurt us, but from our willingness to create a space where truth, kindness, and conviction are allowed to exist. And sometimes, that, more than anything else, is the greatest gift.